Hello, Lila.
Hello, Devin.
Welcome back to Ritual Space.
I have tingles.
Tingles from my toes to the tips of my fingers.
Pretty much just in those parts, yes.
That might be a circulation problem.
Oh, I think I do have a circulation problem, but it's okay. I am in Bali.
Horizontal with Lila. Horizontal with Lila.
What does it mean to be together? It's a question we've all been asking ourselves a lot lately. A global pandemic and the necessary social distancing required to stop the spread have taken many of our usual methods of being together offline. Drinks, dinners, shared spaces, hugs, and handshakes are all hard to come by, while technology pushes us into increasingly online forms of pseudo-togetherness. In a year where most of us have held more conference calls than hands, it's become a vital question. What does it mean to be together? Hi, I'm Devin Person. I'm a 21st century wizard and the host of this podcast as a ritual, an ongoing magical ritual that uses the power of podcasting to transcend time and space to help every single person who listens in, which yes, includes you, dear listener, join us in collectively manifesting a slightly better reality. As a podcast and ritual concerned with the magic of time, space, and place, we dance around this question of being together a lot. But today we'll explore it in a new way with some help from my dear friend Lila, host of the podcast Horizontal with Lila, a show that explores intimacy recorded while host and guests are all, you guessed it, horizontal, lying down, prone, supine, whatever you want to call it. While Lila has previously joined the ritual for her very own episode, How to Take Life Lying Down, today she's bringing along her listeners. Just like when the Jetsons met the Flintstones or the Simpsons met the Critic, today's ritual is a crossover episode between this podcast as a ritual and Horizontal with Lila. We're merging streams of consciousness, connection, and conversation to see if we can find not the answer, but some answers to the question of what it means to be together, especially when we're far apart. You see, Lila is in Bali and I'm in Kentucky. According to conventional notions of time, that means we're 13 hours apart, separated by thousands of miles of land and ocean. Yet through the magic of this podcast, we were able to share space with each other, spend time together, to chat, catch up, and chart new terrain in the map of our friendship. So what does it mean to be together? Can the pixelated approximation of a lover's face on a cell phone screen ever match the intimacy of an in-person experience? Are the new modes of being and togetherness we're creating with technology different but equally deserving of our attention and respect? Or are they just pale imitators of the real thing? These are the tangled webs of reality Lila and I will be wrapping ourselves in today as magic and intimacy intertwine when this podcast gets horizontal.
Hello, horizontal lovers and ritualists. Horizontal is the podcast about sex, love, and relationships of all kinds, recorded while lying down. This Ritual is Horizontal is part of my Season 4, the season of experiments. Usually I have a guest or two reclining next to me, sharing a pillow. But this season, in the era of COVID, my guest is often lying down across the world from me, as Devin is here. And we have an intimate, vulnerable, long-ranging, and long-form conversation that unfolds over the course of 3 to 5 hours and gets divided into 2 to 4 episodes. Typically, the first half of our conversation is available in all the podcast places, and the latter half is available exclusively to patrons of the Horizontal Arts. In the latter part of our conversation, which will be episode 124 on Horizontal, we discuss a bit of ghosting wizardry, dating reviews, self-holds, and parenting our inner child. Then I tell Devin a story about being photographed nude in a nest and the most miserable, sexy dance party. and Devin conjures a 3-point spell for alchemizing connection across distance. One way to gain access to episode 124 is to become a patron of the Horizontal Arts on Patreon. Patreon is a portal to the work of the modern-day independent artist, like the love child of crowdfunding and a subscription service. A monthly contribution to my Patreon unlocks over 50 exclusive episodes, and a monthly contribution to Devin's Patreon offers you access to magical rituals centered around numbers of, shall we say, modern-day interest, one of which I participated in. The number was 69, and the episode is titled, How to Pleasure Yourself and Others. Last night I listened back to it for the first time since recording it, and I got turned on, so I highly recommend that episode. To become a patron, navigate directly to patreon.com/horizontalwithlila and patreon.com/thispodcastisaritual. The other way is this. As a rare gift in honor of our collaboration, you can gain access to the full episode if you head over to Devin's This Podcast is a Ritual feed, even if you aren't a patron of the Horizontal Arts. Which means, if you are listening to this on Devin's feed, you get the whole thing right now. The experiment of this episode, as Devin described, is a mashup, and this is my very first mashup episode. When I think about mashups, I think of some intrepid songstress like my friend Megan Tonjes, and the way she puts 2 pop songs in a blender on YouTube and makes something creamily delicious, both capturing the infectious joy and the hookiness of the original songs, and somehow also more than that, the alchemy of 2 entities enjoined, creating something that does not exist before they are enmeshed. In other words, magic. In this part of our conversation, I tell Devin the story of Hamilton and the Hondalorian, and we talk about connecting across distance, phone calls versus video calls, charting new territory friends and rerun friends, the nutrients of digital communication and joy of sexting, the seamlessification of dating, resilience, rejection, and confidence, and icing on Tinder. Through the magic of the interwebs, come lie down with us in Canggu, Bali, Indonesia, Louisville, Kentucky, and wherever you find yourself horizontal.
Now, this is awkward because normally I'm used to handling this part, but I'll just hand the reins over to you.
One of the magics of this medium is that we can say a word, and you at home can say it with us. And through the mystery of time and space, we can be saying this magic word simultaneously. Devin, what is today's magic word?
Today's magic word is engagement.
Engagement.
Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Engagement.
Now, it's funny because I was thinking it was going to be connection, and at the last moment it shifted.
I like how there's multiple meanings, because at first I thought of the enlivenment, right? The lively participation. And then I thought of a ring.
Yeah, I had the opposite, where I was intending it to be. I've thought about this in my social relations lately of who actually engages. Like, you can spend time with somebody and they're just talking about themselves the whole time and they don't ask you a single question, and it's a very different energy when you feel truly engaged with somebody else. But then, of course, as soon as I said it, I was like, oh, this sounds like I'm proposing.
Actually, that's something that I've noticed about my current lover, is that he doesn't ask me a lot about my history. He asks me a lot about recent, like what I experienced. He'll download after almost every sexual session, which I really appreciate. And he'll ask me what I enjoyed, and he'll ask me what didn't work for me. And so he's curious and engaged about what we're participating in together and our recent history. But the fact that he doesn't ask me about my previous life or my thoughts on the universe or my friends, my dreams gives me
Your
pause.
history.
My history. Yeah. Why doesn't he want to know about my history?
I mean, I can't answer that for you. I can't read the mind of a stranger, but I will tell you that's one of the things that I've thought about with engagement is it's really fun when you get to know new people because you can ask so many questions and get to tell so many stories about your own self.
I know. And I have all these great stories.
It's a slightly different feeling when it's much later on and you start telling a story and you're like, oh wait, have you heard this one? They're like, yeah, you've told this to me like 5 times. And you're like, God damn it. So
But that
yeah,
means
I
they
think
were listening and they
it means
heard
yeah.
you before.
Yeah, it means they weren't listening. You just weren't listening to yourself talk, which I think is a problem I succumb to from time to time.
Oh, yes. Yes, that can be a problem.
So I would say that's maybe not a great sign, but I think
No, I don't
it's
think it
also
is.
one that's, it's hard to top from the bottom with that. Like you
Ask
can
me
just
about
ask.
myself.
Right. You can just say it bluntly, or if you're like, well, what do you like about this thing? And then they answer, and you're like, I like
I
this,
like.
and then and then yeah, like I rarely find like the other person gets the clue in that. I guess you could say, what do you want to know about me? So then you're asking them a question that then leads to more questions.
I like that. I like that. I told him a story that is really dear to me about how my darling friend John loaned me his car, loaned me his Honda Lorian, as it's named now.
That is a truly great car name.
I know. To go across the country in 2017 and do my Horizontal Does America tour. Now, not many people would loan you a car, their car, for 2 months, to put 10,000 miles on. This is, I think, an incredible...
Yeah, that's a pretty big gift.
It's an incredible feat of friendship, and he is massively generous, and I love him so much. And I was telling my lover this story of how he loaned me the car, and then when I got back, I was like, I want to do something for this man. I want to do something so special and surprising, something that nobody has done for him. And I know he's the biggest theater nerd that I know, particularly musical theater. So I asked him what shows he dreams of seeing that he hasn't had the opportunity to see. And of course, they were the 2 most highly sought after tickets on Broadway. It was Hamilton and Dear Evan Hansen. Tickets were running for both of them, I think, in the 500 to 1,000, range. It was just insane, in bananas.
New York loves that mob mentality of like something's value is what the crowd decides, and then you whip people up into a fervor, and they'll stand in line for 10 hours to get a donut.
I know. I didn't even think that was possible on Broadway, but they did it. They made Hamilton into such a thing that people would pay it, that they were able to make that the market value of those tickets.
Well, then the value is that you got to go see it. It gets more valuable because other people didn't get to go see it, and you got these expensive, hard to find tickets.
Exclusive, right? The exclusivity of it, and the bragging rights, and etc.
Yeah.
So I was like, how am I going to do this? And I have a connection to someone who owns the Cast Album record production company. And I've never asked him for anything. And this time I reached out and
you've been keeping that Broadway Connect in your back pocket.
This time I reached out and I told him the story of what this man had done for me. And he knew all about my podcast and everything. And I said, do you have any hookup? Can you help? And he said, yes, but it won't be free. I need you to give me 3 dates next year, because it was in December that I asked him about it, December 2017. Give me 3 dates in January and February, and I can't promise.
Something about the line, and it won't be free, makes me think of like this weird Faustian bargain of, yes, I can get you the Broadway tickets, but it will cost you
Your soul.
dearly.
and so I gave him the dates. He got back to me and he said, okay, it's going to be $200 a ticket. And I was like, ooh, okay. All right. It's worth it. The date is, say, February 3rd. And I tell my friend John, clear your day. That day is mine. I own that day.
Mhm.
And that happens to be, and I tell him to dress up. And that happens to be a day of a grand blizzard in New York. Massive blizzard. And it's so bad, I actually call the theater and I say, is the show still on? They're like, the show is still on. So
The show must go on.
indeed, as they say. And so I get all dolled up, basically wearing a ball gown and in my Russian princess coat, and we traipse through the snow. And first I take him to my favorite restaurant and I treat him to dinner. So he thinks, oh, it's, she's taking me out to a nice dinner and thanks. That's great. And it's in Midtown, but on the east side. And then I take him to that Japanese bookstore, the biggest Japanese bookstore in New York, because he loves manga and things like that. And he had been there, but always enjoys it. And then we stomp our way across town, right? So I take him on 43rd Street all the way across to 10th Avenue, which is further than the theater, and then up on 10th Avenue. So we've passed the theater district. We're now really in Hell's Kitchen restaurant row. And then we go up to 46th and I double back.
So tricksy.
I think it was 46th. And then as we're passing the theater, it's a huge crowd and everybody's kind of jostling and I'm acting annoyed. And then when we get in front of the marquee, I stop, I look up and I smile at him and he goes, no. And I was like, yes.
Oh, that's amazing.
I go to the box office and the tickets are in the 4th row orchestra. I have never sat in the 4th row orchestra in my entire theater going life. I'm used to being in the last row in the nosebleed seats. And I'm very happy.
The obstructed view where you have to like crane your neck around a pillar.
And I'm very happy to be there. We're in the 4th row orchestra and he is just, I wish I could describe to you the look on his face, right? It is just absolute disbelieving, joyous amazement.
Well, that's one of those perfect surprises where you get to lead up to it and have your little subterfuge and have that moment of reveal, and then the person gets to marinate in it because suddenly whatever they thought was happening that night, for the next few hours, they're like, oh my God, I'm in the theater. This is what's happening tonight. This is amazing. I can't believe I'm here.
Yes. We took selfies. And also, because of the way that I like to experience things, I hadn't ever listened to the music. So I was hearing everything for the absolute first time. He knew most of it by heart, but he looked over at an early point in the show and realized that I was experiencing it like a child, right? Just having, I'm raptly attentive because I'm trying to pick up as much of it as I can because I've never heard it and move so fast. And so then he got the enjoyment of vicariously experiencing it for the first time through me as well.
That's that perfect feedback loop where when somebody is passionate about something, you can enjoy giving them that thing and then they can enjoy you experiencing it for the first time. And it's so nice when two people can open up and engage with each other in that kind of feedback loop.
It was a perfect evening and it felt like a fitting tribute to the generosity of his friendship and what he had done for me. And so as as my lover and I were on this trip over New Year's and we were out to dinner, I wound up telling this story. And he was like, yeah, that's great. Okay, can we go back to the hotel now?
See, I liked the story within the story more than I liked the story.
Well, yes. Yes, that is part of the
And
point. And the
well,
lack of engagement, right? The lack
yeah.
of real interest in what I'm sharing. And what I'm sharing is what deep friendship means to me, how I like to honor the people in my life that I love. There's a lot of meaning that you could derive from that story about me as a human and what I care about, the way that I prize connection, surprise, quality time, mutual enjoyment, play, if you're looking for
Also,
that, if you're interested.
also just the beautiful side of New York. I think that's it. Having moved out of New York this last year, I was transported by your story and could really feel like there's nothing like going out in a blizzard in New York because you feel like wherever you're going, you earn it when you get there.
Oh my
And it's so
God.
amazing and you're so present. And there's not like, oh, should we go to that other place or that other party or should I? You're like, no, we're all here. Every one of us in this bar is now, we're all survivors and we're going to just like we're the last humans on Earth because it's a little bit snowy outside, but we've made it.
I mean, it makes everything feel like an epic adventure to be tromping through that
Truly, truly.
virgin snow before anybody touches it while everybody's just inside ordering seamless, but you're out there and
You
you're
are out
making
there. You are living life
footprints.
in the raw. It's great.
Yeah, it's delicious.
Well, we once upon a time were able to tromp around the city together, and we've since been flung to the far corners of the earth. I'm
Mm.
in Kentucky, and you're in Bali. And when you first reached out about doing this crossover episode, I was so delighted, and I think we slowly gravitated towards a very interesting theme, which is how do we create not just connections, but how do we create this engagement across distances and especially with the digital divide where there's something that just doesn't feel the same about a Zoom call or a text message or any of the ways that we have to relate. I don't think the technology in itself is entirely to blame, but I think it presents a challenge that has to be tackled with thought and ingenuity to really truly like engage and maintain that relationship.
Is it possible for something to feel visceral and corporeal when it is not possible to be corporeal? When
Mm,
it is not feasible to be in person? And maybe not, and maybe there is a holding of this paradox or a holding of two simultaneous truths, that it is not as good, and also there is great depth and benefit that we can find from it, and maybe a third one that's like, this is all we have right now.
right, right. Like, yes, I I would have preferred Coke, but Pepsi's fine. Uh, yeah, yeah. I think the idea of corporeal is interesting. Of how do we physically sit together, but I think there's also that idea of substance. And I have thought for a while about visits from old friends. And there's times that you visit an old friend or an old friend visits you, and you sit around and you talk about, remember when, and oh yeah, and what happened to what's his name? And then they leave, and you're like, okay, the next time we see each other, I don't think we're going to tell any stories about this time. Like, this was all just reruns.
Yeah.
And then there's the other experience where a friend visits you and they're only in New York for one night, and you go out and you end up singing in that Japanese karaoke restaurant that you jumped into when you were walking by, and then you meet someone there, they take you to this like rooftop where you watch the sunrise, and like you have this amazing magical memorable night. And I think even with phone calls there's the difference between just the perfunctory hi, how are you, how you been, and the calls that continue to build and develop that relationship. And maybe again, just keep the flame alive. So when you can hang out in person, there'll be plenty to light up. But
I've thought a lot about this even before this distance was untenable or out of our
amplified.
control or amplified.
Yeah.
I've thought a lot about the kind of friendships in which you report back, right? You're doing a reporting or an inventory of your life. What's happened since I last saw you? Oh, this and this and this. And then you fill each other in, and that is your experience together, is this catching up. But it's really
Yep.
a telling of stories and a reporting, as opposed to the relationships where you are experiencing things together and they're centered around experiencing things together.
Bingo.
And sometimes I've found myself just being in a default mode with a certain person, even when we can see each other, even when we could just get together and we could be at the Met, but we're in a coffee shop just reporting what we've done outside of our relationship rather than making memories together.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can sit across from someone and have the most perfunctory catch up. Just here's what I've been doing. There's what you've been doing. Oh, it's getting a little bit late. Time to go. See you in 7 months, I guess. Or I think phone calls are intimate, and we'll probably circle back to this, but I'm thinking about people that fall in love at a distance, and you can stay up all night talking to someone and continue to mine new territory and new ideas and have one of those conversations where you're going to the bathroom and you're making yourself a snack and you're getting in bed and you're like, the phone is cradled the whole time until your battery is dead, and you're never sharing physical space, but you're charting new territory together in that shared realm.
But I'm not even talking about perfunctory, because I don't have a lot of perfunctory relationships like that. I've mainly pushed those people to the outer spheres of my planet friendship,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
They're out in acquaintance orbit.
Yeah.
And so I don't devote a lot of time to those people. But there are people in my life who I have fallen into a pattern of, when I see them, we wind up telling each other stories about what's happened since the last time we saw each other.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean that it's not deep or connected. In fact, I just had a phone call, and it was a phone call, not a video call, because there's something, it's odd. My mom only wants to have video calls with me because she really loves to see me. But I feel actually much more intimately connected when we're just having a phone call and I'm not looking at myself and seeing how my hair is and what, and I'm not angling, concerned about where I'm holding the phone and getting a good angle for the person to see me and making sure the light is okay and I'm not backlit and blah, 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 all this other stuff.
There's a whole science of that too. One, your eyes are not looking the way that eyes would normally look because you're looking at the screen. So you're looking slightly downward, which makes you look more guilty and less trustworthy. And then even though it's amazing that we have this like lightning fast video and you can be on the other side of the world and we can see each other in what seems like real time.
It is magic.
But those little glitches and those moments where it just slows, all of that sends very weird signals to our brain. So it's like, even though we're not consciously aware of it, it would be like having a phone call with horrible hiss over the whole phone call. And you're like, wow, I feel so drained. It was really hard to hear that person. Your brain is trying to figure out all of these signals that it should normally be able to get from eyebrow raises and small micro movements of muscles and all of these things that are hard to get on a little blurry video screen. It's incredibly taxing. And so after an hour-long video call, you feel way, way, way more drained than you would after getting coffee across from someone.
Yeah.
But please continue. I had misunderstood your point about the report.
Yeah, or then having a phone call. So this phone call that I had with Tiana a few days ago was really juicy and really exciting and really satisfying. I was sitting in a cafe, sitting on a crate, eating a parfait basically, and talking to her, and it was a catch up because we hadn't spoken in a few months, which is not usual for us. We usually speak a lot more often. So there's a lot to share. And there was a lot of energy and momentum and excitement behind sharing, because it's like, oh my God, well, who have you? Oh, you're not with that guy anymore. Oh my God, what happened? What is he doing? What is bananas? Oh, and this person got blasted on social media. And then the internal stuff, right? Like what's been going on inside me, the downs and the ups, and the way that I've been talking to myself and what I want to create and what I'm dreaming of for the next chapter, and timing. And there was a lot of juice, and it felt very nourishing. It did feel like quality time. Quality time and physical touch are my top two love languages.
Mm-hmm.
I like them together. To me, quality time usually denotes in person. And I remember thinking about creating a course around connection. And I was talking to Kenneth about it, and he was encouraging me to make sure that I include digital connection, because especially for the younger generation, even before they were forced to, these digitally mediated means of connection, like through gaming, through Instagram, through video, new ways that people are connecting. And if I create some kind of hierarchy of connection that looks down on digital connection, I'm not going to help people very well. There is something in me that really feels that for me, it's not as good. Like I would choose any day to be walking with Tiana on the West Side Highway path than, sitting on a phone call with her from across the world. I'd much prefer to be in her presence, to see her, to feel those micro expressions, to be able to touch her and give her a squeeze. And, all those things are so valuable to me.
Do you know the phrase "the medium is the message" by Marshall McLuhan?
I have heard it.
The basic idea is that the mode that we engage with something is more important than the content. So the difference between reading a book and watching a movie is far greater than a book about birds and a documentary about birds. Like, even though you'd think that, like, oh, a trashy romance novel and a book about birds are like totally different, and a documentary about birds and a book about birds are like the same subject matter, so it's the same, but it's actually what's most important, he's saying, is it's the mode in which you're communicating and receiving this information.
So
If that holds
what would
true
be
in
that
this.
difference between the mode of reading a book and the mode of watching a documentary?
When you're reading, it's happening totally in your mind. You're looking, your eyes are scanning these symbols that you read as words and letters and words and sentences, and you're creating information in your mind. And even if you're looking at images, they're not moving, whereas there's a whole different language of visual media that has edits and jump cuts and voiceover and different things that all combine and are absorbed by your brain in a different way. But I'm curious if what we've been talking about, how it tracks, like, is a boring conversation with a coworker in person more alike? Wait, how do I make the chart work in my head? So, like, yeah, like an in-person conversation, are they all more alike in a certain specific meaningful way than these other forms of digital intimacy? Like, if you stay up all night texting back and forth with somebody, maybe that's amazing connection in its own right, but it's still categorically different than if you sat across from them having that conversation.
Yes, but not. But I am also trying to figure out how to parse it. But I do not think that the surface level water cooler conversation will be more nourishing just because it is in person than the deep all night texting conversation, even though texting feels so much more removed. Because for me, as I think about intimacy, as I try to define it, as I begin to work on something that could be spun into a TED Talk, I think about the need to see the person deeply, and feel deeply seen in return.
Mm-hmm.
If you have that, but it is mediated by a telephone or a device, a computer, I still think that will be more of an antidote to loneliness than a quick chat with your barista.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a great example because I had very deep connections with my baristas.
I was just thinking it's like different vitamins, or it's like maybe it's like vitamins and fiber. Like you could have a diet that has all the vitamins you need, but it doesn't have any fiber, and it's not going to be good for you. And I think maybe that's what we're experiencing right now, where it's like, oh, I'm in quarantine and I'm seeing friends on Zoom calls and meeting with coworkers and having phone catch ups with family or friends or lovers, whoever it might be, but we're missing some of those daily roughage of standing next to people, asking someone what time it is, talking to a
Yeah.
coworker about Game of Thrones, all of these things that feel banal in a certain sense, but probably are also very important. And like I was saying earlier, they're a feast for the senses, especially the unconscious things that we notice in person and we can observe a more complete view.
I would say we're getting most of our nutrients, but we're missing something like iron.
Yeah.
So we're anemic, right? So
Yes.
we're getting most of what we need because most of us, well, that's not true actually. According to studies, many people would not say they had one close friend. So we can't say that most of us do. But many of us have deep connections with people that we're not physically with, that we can talk to over Zoom or on the phone or text. And so we're getting a battery of nutrients. Let's say we're getting our vitamin B and we're getting our vitamin C, and maybe we're not getting as much vitamin D because we're not getting the sun, but let's say we're getting most of our nutrients, but we're missing something that is essential to, I'm going to say, human thrival.
Yeah. I think what you said a moment ago is really interesting about that idea of intimacy being, I think maybe you used the word totality. Like I thought about when you're on a video chat and that frame is just this rectangle. It's just like here's my face and a little bit of the room I'm in, and if I walk away to go to the bathroom, you don't see that. Whereas if you spend, even if you meet somebody and you're having like a 72-hour weekend whirlwind romance where you just don't leave each other's presence, you get more of a view of that person. Like even if it's still like the new part of a relationship and it's all excitement and they still have to go to the bathroom, you still know where they are as they move around, they have to eat food. Whereas when we only show up in front of the screen, it is just the barest part of our existence.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it hard to, because we all see our own full experience constantly. We see all of the ups and downs and all of the, boring parts and the gross parts and the sad parts and the mundane parts. And when you only get the catch-up report, you're getting this edited version. And so I think there is something helpful to being with people and seeing the parts that they can't keep off camera.
And maybe that's what you mean about the fiber, right? It's like the time that I'm sitting in the chair outside my room eating my lunch and looking at the rooftops, that's something you don't get when we're over Zoom. That's something that you can't get unless you are in my company sitting in that chair next to me. I have been thinking a lot about and conceptualizing this distant form of connection or virtual connection. There's something desiccated about it. There's something that is devoid of most of its juice. And so I've been thinking about it like space ice cream. When you were a kid, did you go to the
Or no, Dippin' Dots is different. No, I know it's space ice cream.
No, not Dippin' Dots.
Exactly.
If when you were a kid, you went to a science museum in the United States, then you probably got this silvery packet of space ice cream. And, space ice cream sort of tastes a little bit like dried apples. It's a little bit thicker and it's a little bit more styrofoam-like. And when you bite into it, it is sweet. It is sweet. It will hit the sweet spot it will hit those sweet taste buds, but there is something lifeless about it. There is something very, very missing, and it is not ice cream. It does not feel like ice cream. And so that's how I've been thinking about it. It's like, it's a different thing. Actually, my lover says this about vegan cheese and stuff like that. He's like, don't fucking call it cheese. You know, if you just, I said when I ordered something and it had vegan cheese on it, I was like, would you like to try some of my puffy goo? Some of my savory puffy goo? And he was like, oh yeah, sure. Because he just doesn't want to think of it as cheese, because that will just be a great disappointment, because he's going to compare it to the memory of all the cheeses that he's ever had in his cheesy life. And
and that's a really good point, because I think it's easy to get caught up on this criticism and sort of like nostalgia. You know, every generation is like, when I was a kid, things were great and people were real, and now it's gotten worse. And it's very easy to forget that there's amazing things that you're not experiencing. Like someone from an older generation, like, oh, have you ever had the thrill of texting nudes back and forth with a recent lover all night long? Like that can be a lot of fun. Like I'm sure it was great to use the same pickup line over and over and over again at your local singles bar, but it's also fun to connect on Tinder with somebody and have a sudden date that surprises you and ends up in a really hot hookup, like just because you swiped on someone and started chatting. So I think there's positives there too, but you're right that it's just categorically different.
there is that
And
romanticizing. It's like that Woody Allen film where they're always like, oh, but the Belle Epoque, those were the days, you know? And you have that, of course, romanticizing because you weren't living through it, because you didn't experience the fiber of it. And yes, I love that perspective of, yeah, well, have you ever had video sex where you saw somebody's body over the screen, like they were your personal porn before you even met them, you know? And there are new experiences to be had that I don't think we recognize the value of so much.
yeah, there's a weird phenomenon though that I haven't not been able to solve for myself, which is like the empty room.
Oh my God. I know.
Like you can like there was a moment when the quarantine was really in full swing and people were starting to throw these raves, I guess, on Zoom, and there's a bunch of different rooms set up and go wander about them. And I was fortunate enough to be partnered during that time, so I was just hanging out with my fiance, which is very lucky. I definitely recognize that privilege. But I had a moment where I almost had like sort of FOMO, where I was like, oh, I haven't been on any of these Zoom party calls. Am I missing out? And maybe I'm wrong. Like I haven't experienced it, so somebody else could say, Devin, the best party I've been to in my life was a 30-person Zoom call. And I'll be like, all right, I guess I just don't know. But it is weird that no matter what's happening on that screen, the moment you close that laptop, you're just in an empty room by yourself again.
I know. I've been thinking a lot about that. I've attended and facilitated at 3 virtual intimacy retreats where they've had an array of workshops and kinky things and communication things and grief things. And I did one about emotional release techniques, and I did a connection games workshop, and each one of them had a virtual play party. There is something fun and sexy about being in a Zoom room with people who are touching themselves or playing with their partners or whatever. And you can get very turned on and you can get very, very into it. And there's something very special and low stakes about being able to reach out to somebody digitally, because you can direct message them over Zoom with very little consequences, right? If they don't want to respond, they simply don't respond. It's not like going up to somebody in person at a sex party and then being rebuffed or them saying, excuse me, or, there's something that is more easeful and elegant about doing it online that makes it, as Wendy Miller said from Sex Ed the Musical podcast, she said it's a good entry point. it's a good first sex party experience for anybody because you are quite safe and you are by yourself. But I had that experience, right, where I had a wonderful time. At the last one, I did a shower scene where what I really wanted to do was shower and shave my legs. And I had just taught a workshop. Beforehand, I had been very ill, so I hadn't done my usual prepping and primping
Mhm.
and so I set up the computer on the sink, and I was living in this place with this huge, beautiful outdoor shower. And at the beginning of this sex party, I was in the playroom showering and shaving my legs in front of the camera. I was feeling good to myself and I was smooth, and then I connected with one of the other facilitators and we were flirting and he was dancing for me and it got really sexy. And then we went into one of the private rooms that they left open, so it was just us, and he got the playlist, which was very, very sensual. And we had a great time touching ourselves and looking at each other and talking. And that was one of the very rare instances in which I've done any sort of the first time meeting someone or pickup play, the first time
Yeah.
meeting someone, playing with them, even though it was virtual. There was still an unusual sequence of events for me. The play party ended. We went back into the same room for like a closing Zoom thing, and then got on a private call with him, and we finished our experience, and we both masturbated to an orgasm, and we chatted, and we stayed up real late, and that was fun. But then we got off the phone, right? We closed the computer, and then there I was alone in my room, in my empty room, with no prospect of, because this was during quarantine, with no prospect of going on a date or seeing anybody in person or seeing that person in person, as he lived in Florida and I'm in Bali. That is what I think about when I think about the advent of VR and VR sex, and people turning to VR sex because of its lack of messiness and the fact that you don't have to deal with any emotional fallouts and all of this. You're still, even if you can get the sensations, even if you can, as on some TV shows, step inside a suit that has you feeling heat and it replicates everything. When you turn it off, you're still going to be just you alone in your room.
Beautifully said. And to play devil's advocate on both sides, I also know that feeling in real life. Even from positive things. Sometimes it's just like the party's over and you get home and then you're there and you're at home and you're like, was that all a dream? Like, oh my God, like what a crazy night that was. And now here I am just back at baseline by myself. And then on the other hand, I wonder if with the technology that we have, if some of our frustration is just that it's in a more primitive form. If you think back to the 90s and trying to surf the internet, it was not the same experience that we have today. I remember loading up video clips to then like wait and go play basketball outside and then come back and watch my 30-second long video clip that had finally finished loading. And now we can stream Netflix. And so I wonder if some of these fixes, it'll always be like you said, it'll always be space ice cream, it'll always be something different. But if people go like, oh my God, to be in virtual space, able to take on any body and form, and then to be able to trigger pleasure in your partner, like using this crazy interface, like so much fine tuning and things that can be done, it's way better than just trying to like poke at somebody with your hands and tongue.
Don't you think we'll have that regard or that nostalgia for the messiness and the realness of skin to skin contact and saliva?
Absolutely.
I don't know that can ever be replaced, even if technology is so sophisticated that we have an uncanny valley experience of revulsion at the thing that is so human-like. Even if we're to that point where robots feel so human-like, I think we will have a hierarchy of this ultimately is not real.
And I think the more that something becomes taboo, the more it becomes fetishized. I noticed the other day that I was thinking, I was like, I'm at the point where it's not just like, oh, I'm so sick of the pandemic. I want to be able to like dance in a room with people. I'm like, I want to be able to like drink from somebody else's cup again. I want to share a joint with somebody. Like I was always the person that didn't care about germs in that
Germs.
sense. And like, yeah, like here, have a sip from my water bottle. Like when can we do that again? And I'm
Mm.
sure that people are rebelling and doing things that are risky just because it's now off limits.
Oh,
So I could
definitely.
imagine a world where everyone has crazy four-dimensional holotropic VR sex, and then you go to the grimy little glory hole booth to just like kiss and poke each other with fingers for 15 minutes.
Yeah, there's actually a beautiful sci-fi book called Blindness that a
Mm,
friend gave to me when I asked before I left on this trip, what's a book that you read once and then immediately reread? And
mm.
he's like, I'm going to send it to you. And so he sent it to me, and I just read it a few months back. In it, they have all that, right? They can step into any avatar, they can have any kind of virtual sex, and it's clean and it's accessible and it's seamless and all this. But he has a relationship. He's quite genetically modified, and he has a relationship with a woman who has a penchant for old style sex
Mm.
and the messiness of it and the grittiness of it and the realness of it. I think maybe it's similar to the people who genuinely miss the old New York, genuinely abhor the Disneyfication of Times Square and miss when it was druggies around the corner selling, dime bags and when it was dangerous. There is
Stepping over
something.
a dead junkie on your way into the gallery. Yep.
I
I
mean,
think I
I
think
don't miss that, but but there
but
is.
I think there's that element of risk that comes into it. Like you talked about the virtual play party is safe,
Yes.
but I think risk is the price that we pay for some of these exhilarating experiences and the humanness of it.
I'm
Like,
not sure that there is any exhilaration without risk.
yeah, I don't think so.
There was this fantastic article about why teens are having less sex in the Atlantic. I read the whole thing avidly. It has a lot of potential cultural factors. But what I gleaned from that whole article was that the reason why teens are having less sex is because their risk tolerance is so low,
Oh, interesting.
so much lower than previous generations. For instance, in the 50s, if you wanted to have a date with somebody, you had to call them on the telephone that their mother or father would pick up.
Yes.
You had to talk to their mother or father and try to get through that gatekeeper in order to talk to this person and ask them on a date. Going further back, you would have to go through a series of prescribed courtship rituals and then write somebody a letter, which may or may not be delivered, may or may not be intercepted, may or may not be reciprocated. You had to take risks. Even before we had cell phones, if you wanted to hit on somebody, you had to go up to them and talk to them, or you had to get your friend to do it, right? You had to take a risk in some way. You had to either go up to them and feel your heart pounding and feel your palms sweating and feel your breath get quicker and figure out something to say. Even if it was just hi, it felt like, oh my God, I'm going to say hi to this super hot guy. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my
The
God, oh my God, oh my God.
quintessential 90s thing of like, you gotta get her number. And then you think about the logistics of, well, okay, I have the number and now it's 2 days later and I have to call and say, "Hey, I'm Brad from Saturday night at the bar.
Right.
How many guys has this person given their number to?" It's just a different thing, and I think you're totally right that it's changed. And yeah, even with online dating, if you're in a big enough city, there's very low risk of ghosting someone. You ghost somebody,
Very
you're not
low.
gonna run into them again. So why bother to maintain these civil connections of saying no thank you, I'm just going to go on now.
And this is one of the things that the kids said when they were interviewed. They said that they didn't want to have the risk of talking to somebody in person that they weren't already sure was interested in them and wanted to go on a date with them. There is this vast cavern of risk, bravery, courage, experience, exhilaration, excitement, turn on, desire that comes from looking at someone, wanting them, and then figuring out and bringing yourself to the point where you break ice with them. And the thing is, these kids are not getting that because they won't talk to anybody in person that they don't already know wants to go on a date with them.
That's the whole delightful dance of flirtation. I've even found when you get into an actual relationship, it's like, oh, I miss that initial spark when like I'm sitting next to someone watching a movie and they move their legs and then their foot is brushing up against me. And I'm like, is this an invitation? If I start massaging their foot right now, am I going to watch them pull their foot back and I get a strong signal? Or do they like,
Snuggle
start
into me.
pushing their foot onto my crotch and I get a different signal? And it's exhilarating. There's another parallel, I think, between the much praised old New York and this lack of sex with teens that we're talking about. I remember reading once about, maybe it was like digital cameras or something, that it was like the rise of GoPro. And they were talking that, as things got fancier and crazier, everyone was thinking, oh, okay, we're going to like consumers are going to keep wanting the fanciest, best camera. And that turned out not to be true. People were like, oh, this camera is $100 and it does everything I need. Great. The image is slightly less good. Who cares? Like it satisfies my needs. And I wonder if there's a point at which digital intimacy is not the same as old flesh and blood, but it satisfies and it's easier.
Yes.
So if you think about somebody in New York right now, not pandemic, but just 2019 New York. Oh, I'm supposed to go out to this event tonight, but I can stay home in my warm apartment and watch whatever I want on Netflix and just
And
cuddle up
Tinder.
and order Seamless and look at Tinder, and that's fine. Whereas if you were in the 1980s, you'd be like, well, I'm in my apartment. I've already read these magazines. There's nothing else on TV. I'm never going to meet anybody sitting in this apartment. I'm going to go down to the bar or see that show. It forced people to go out more often, I think. And I think there was plenty of times that I was at something in New York and I was like, man, how many people would be here if they weren't at home being lazy, watching Netflix, eating Seamless right now?
And that's the
And so
thing with the ease of what we can get, right? It's the seamlessification of dating where you think you can just order up whatever you want and send it a car to arrive to you. And you treat it like a catalog and like a buffet and like a seamless order.
This is like a super heteronormative example, but if you think about like the dweeby guy in the 1980s who's like, like I'm not I'm not getting lucky with women. I'm going to have to like work on myself and try and figure out a better strategy and keep trying until I'm able to like hopefully develop as a person to the point where I can succeed more. And I wonder about someone growing up today who's like, well, that was nerve wracking and I didn't even try. And so I'm so terrified of failure that, oh, what's this on the internet? Unlimited hardcore pornography? Sure, I'll just use this instead. And I totally understand how incels and these other victims of this age are sort of created because like there's a path of least resistance and that leads to stagnation and I'm sure a host of other problems when the effort required to engage feels daunting and the alternative is just so much easier.
It's risk tolerance and it's also the ability to cope with your emotions such that you can deal with rejection.
Yeah.
Because rejection seems like the worst thing in the world to so many people. It seems like, oh my God, I cannot handle it if I go up to somebody and they don't want to talk to me. I will be mortified. I'll never pick myself up off the floor, when the truth is that you do it a few times and you're like, oh, well, okay, and that, you win some, you lose some. But you have to have that kind of, what do they say? Build a thicker skin. You get chafed and your skin gets thicker, so that you develop the the calluses in the right places to dance tango. For instance, I built up these tango calluses from wearing these horrible shoes, and I prized them because they meant that I could dance for longer periods of time. They meant that I had suffered and I had built up the resistance to be able to do this thing I loved for longer, to be able to deal with the challenge that this thing that I loved, sex, romance, excitement, flirtation, that this thing that I loved brought my way, because sometimes you're going to be rejected. That is just how it goes. Well, I was just thinking also about, you mentioned incels, the Japanese equivalent that I've heard about, they're called herbivores, men who choose not to have sex. I don't think that there is a similarly violent bent for these young Japanese men. It's more
It
that
feels more passive.
that they have just chosen not to, and they enjoy their porn, and they maybe get the panties from the vending machine, or they find ways to have a sexual outlet, but they don't want that risk. They don't want the emotionally and maybe also physically messy risk of real life flesh and blood, in-person dating, romance, and sex.
Because this is where I think that the medium is the message thing is very true, is that it's entirely different. Looking at pornography and having physical sex, yes, there is nudity involved. There's probably similar endorphins and dopamine and that kind of stuff, but it's also just totally different. If you're having sex with someone, you don't get to just open a new tab and look for somebody else. I mean, I guess you could try Tindering while in the middle of sex
God.
with somebody. But that's
That's
like a
horrible.
weird move. And I think that if you get used to one form of engagement, it's going to be very intimidating to think about doing that in the real world, where so much could go wrong. You brought up earlier talking about video chatting with your mom and how you see your own reflection and it kind of distracts you from it. And I think that's probably another aspect, is confidence requires a little bit of delusion. I've seen people like I'm glad that we're reckoning with this, and we've decided that being the guy that's just creepily hitting on everybody is not okay anymore. But I've seen people who are confident and end up hooking up with people. They have to have a tolerance of like trying to hit on people where it doesn't work out and not being bothered by it, not being like, oh, that went so poorly. They're like, oh yeah, you see that person was totally into me, and I'm like, I don't think so. I think they definitely weren't. But that delusion helps them keep going and get another at bat. Whereas I wonder right now, like, we're so self-aware, it's harder to maybe there's also the idea that it's like recorded. Like if I go around and I talk to a bunch of strangers at a bar, okay, maybe one of them tells me to buzz off, but like no big deal. But if I'm in high school and I message on Instagram someone that I like, oh god, they could screenshot that message and then they could post it and share it and make fun of me, and there's so much more evidence. I can't imagine what it's like to be young right
Oh
now and
God.
have
Oh,
such a
oh.
trail of digital ephemera in your wake, coming back again and again. So, it's not just like, oh, remember that time at this party when this thing happened? It's like, here's this picture of what you looked like at that party.
I think we also need to talk about Facebook image crafting and a kind of overexposure and mystery, or the lack thereof. We have these digital avatars running around. I mean, I will say for myself that even though I speak very deeply about my true experiences, my struggles with depression and anxiety, my self-worth issues, and my battles with self-esteem and all of this and beauty, I don't spend a lot of time posting and sharing photographs and Instagram stories when I am depressed or when I feel really crummy.
Yep.
That's not what I want to be putting out into the world. As I hate these fucking dogs. I have to tell you, I hate these fucking dogs so much. Oh my fucking God. They like live in this alley right next door. And every once in a while, they just go off for God fucking knows what reason. And I just want to throttle them. That is just how I feel. But
Well, now you can't edit that out because that's real. No curating your conversation about curating our digital presentations of self.
Exactly. So we are curating these photos. Most people are using filters. Most people are using editing software before they share an image of themselves. We learn our angles. We've done a lot to present ourselves in the most flattering light and in the most flattering position. And I've been on Tinder a lot in the past few days, and many male profiles that I come across say, please look like your photos, or I saw one today that said, if you don't look like your photos, you buy me drinks until you look like the photos.
Ew.
I know, it was super gross, but
What a charming way to say that.
I know, but it exemplified this sentiment of people are not representing who they are. And so I think that a lot of these dead-end conversations, because I actually haven't met anybody that I matched with on Tinder this entire year. I have not met with one person. All the people that I've had as lovers or dated, I met in person at some kind of event. These Tinder connections often wind up in these dead-end conversations that when you get to a point where you're finally about to meet, the person disappears. And what is that about? That probably is about them either not being who they represented themselves to be, or them fearing that you're not going to be who you represented yourself to be. And so I think a lot of people indulge in this safe flirtation and this safe escalation of sexiness when it becomes something that would be risky, like, oh, I'm going to be exposed. I don't know if he'll think I'm as pretty as I am in my photos, or, what if, then they don't go further.
Which I've always been, since Tinder started, I've been so curious about how the ecosystem has evolved over time. Like, there must have been a great first 6 months when ghosting wasn't a thing because no one had ever heard of the term, and no one had had dates flake on them repeatedly. So people were just like, oh, awesome. I met this person. We agreed on Wednesday. We're both going to show up. This is great. And I think over time you realize that, oh, fuck, I was saving Wednesday to go on a date with the person. They flaked at the last minute. Well, next time I'm going to set up 3 dates for Wednesday, and then whoever doesn't flake and is the hottest, I'll just go on that one, which means you're flaking on 2 others. So the whole ecosystem then starts to reward this flakiness. And coming back to that idea of engagement, the most baffling thing to me when I was on it was I would message people and they would send me back these brief messages, but they didn't stop communicating with me. They just didn't give me anything to work with.
It's icing. There's a name
How's
for
your
it.
Oh, icing, but it's like, yeah, like, how's your day going? Good.
Fine.
Okay, I don't how's your day going is an invitation to conversation. Like, if you don't want conversation, why are you responding? And if you do, say something that gives me, like, it's like ping pong. Like, hit the ball back to me so I can hit it back to you and we can play the game.
Surely the art of conversation has deteriorated, right? So some people may not even know how to have a conversation.
It's like I never cracked the code. I don't know what the perfect pickup line is on Tinder or any of those things, but it when you get into one of those good conversations, when you are messaging somebody and they're messaging you back, and then dot dot dot. Oh, here's a question. Okay, yeah, I can respond to that. Oh, and then suddenly you're talking about some crazy funny, like, if I was a sandwich, what would I be? And it's a fun way to flirt and get into things and make sexual innuendo and all of that fun stuff. And then other people, it's just, I'm like, are you just not interested in me? Which is fine, but why are you then talking to me? And I don't get how the other conversations that I'm not privy to on Tinder work, where someone's like, hey, and the other person's like, what's up? And then they're like, you're hot. And they're like, thanks, you too. And they're like, we should meet. And they're like, okay. that's And that's how they decide to get a drink, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I've had people try to escalate within 2 messages. Like, "Hey, what's up? What you doing? Here's a picture of my dick," you know?
Yep. See if you'll take the bait.
I'm not going to.
I was wondering last night if, like, I know that there's bots on dating apps that are trying to, spam you and get you to give your credit card information or something. But I was like,
Hmm.
I wonder if, like, how bots would do at just pretending to be a person. If the goal was to just have conversations and try and set up dates, like, could you build an AI bot that would have Tinder conversations for you and could access your your calendar and just be like, "Cool, you're now having drinks," and you're like, "All right, I'll review this message thread and see what we talked about."
I don't know if this is a real thing, but in the book Blindness, there is the term a Chinese room, and
Mm.
it's whether the bot could convince you that it's having a real conversation with you, but it's actually not comprehending. It's actually just putting together, it's basically an algorithm that's putting
Mhm.
together something that is correlated to what it's been sent.
Yeah, I mean, that's the classic thing of the Turing test is the idea of, can you tell whether this is a machine? Can X amount of people, whatever the percentage is, tell that this is a machine that they're talking with? And I was thinking about that, where if I had to sit down across from somebody and have a conversation, it would be very hard to have a machine convince me they're a human, because one, we don't have realistic looking robots,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you would notice a lot more. But I've had text conversations with people that I'm quite sure are human on a dating app that also I think probably, like, if you actually, I was like, was that human? Could that have been faked by a bot? Oh, easily. Yeah. Like, you could definitely have a bot that just says, yo, what's up? Chilling. Yeah, me too. What you doing this weekend? Dick pic. And just
So you've had conversations with people who fail the Turing test.
oh, absolutely. I think most of Tinder probably fails the Turing test.
Yeah, I'll bet. I'll bet. Just from the empirical evidence that I have. You were talking about
Yeah.
ghosting and you said that you thought it was more of a new phenomenon, but I do think that ghosting has been around forever. Perhaps this is happening more often, or perhaps it's sort of like when you're looking for the quarters on the ground, you suddenly see quarters all the time. But it used to be called being stood up, right? Where somebody, you actually you took a shower, you got
Yep.
dressed up, you put your makeup on, you put your perfume on, you got in your car, you drove somewhere, you sat down, and then the person didn't show. And you never heard from them. Why do you think
Well,
that's called being stood up? As though you're standing and you're not able to be seated because your party isn't complete?
I don't know. Oh, maybe. Yeah, that's a pretty good idea. Yeah, I don't
Like
know.
you're standing at the hostess booth and they're like, yep, sorry, we can't seat
Yeah.
you.
You and I both lived in New York, and I think that's where I was when I saw the term ghosting rise. I wonder how ghosting existed in smaller towns. Like, you can't really ghost somebody if there's only 2 bars in town, and sooner or later you're gonna be like, "Hey, asshole, we
Yeah.
dated for 3 weeks. Where did you go?"
Yeah. You just see them. I think people still do it. And then they just, they just like leave the bar real quick. when they know.
Like, Louisville's a smaller city, and I've talked to some friends here that are on Tinder, and they're like, it's interesting because you will see people in real life that you've seen on Tinder, which, if it's just someone who you've swiped past, like, okay, like, that's one thing. But if you've chatted with somebody and then it kind of ended in New York, you weren't likely to, like, the next day get on the subway and go, oh shit, I
Mm.
think that's hot bod 182 or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Like the bigger the city, the lower the accountability. So it's easier for people to do something like that and not worry because they don't think they're going to be confronted with the consequences of their actions ever.
There's less risk.
Less risk. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how risk in these things are actually, again, like, it's like fiber. It's important to have them. It creates accountability and it creates trust networks and all of these things that function. And it feels like we're just in a disruptive era. I'm sure that there's probably a phase where something new comes along and it tears up the old stuff, and everybody's, the new stuff isn't totally plugged in yet, and the old stuff is all kind of broken.
Mm.
And then when the new stuff gets plugged in, you settle down until the next disruption comes along. I think we're just like in between phases right now, and probably will be for a long time, because disruptive technology is going to be the theme of this century. But
Mm.
if I decided that I didn't want to use my cell phone because I don't like how it makes me feel to be looking at my phone all the time, the world is not set up in a way for me to do that. I can't go on dates and ask the restaurant to use their phone to call my date. Like, it's just that, I'm not going to find a phone booth or anything.
It really is like swimming against the current. You really have to
It's
work hard, hard, hard to do it.
in high school. I did not have a cell phone until I was 18, but there was a period where it didn't matter that I didn't have a cell phone because my friends had cell phones, and all I needed to do was like quickly call my parents to check in anyways. So I think that's the other thing, that like I could say, I'm gonna go phone free, and then everyone's gonna have to just call my partner and she's gonna become my secretary, which she doesn't want to do. So the options are constrained right now, especially with a pandemic where we could say, oh, fuck the digital world, let's go have a no phone dinner party, but we can't do that.
Mm.
For more of Lila's magic, visit horizontalwithlila.com or like and subscribe to Horizontal with Lila on your favorite podcasting platform. And if you'd like to join the ongoing magic of this podcast as a ritual, please like, subscribe, follow, or whatever it is you do to pursue podcasts on the platform of your pleasure. Do that now. Or you can visit my website, personasawake.com, where you can learn more about what exactly it means to be a real-life wizard in the 21st century. Thank you for sharing this space with Lila and I. We both look forward to being together with you all again, lying down in a reality much like this one, except slightly better. Until next time, never forget, I believe in you. Your magic is real.
If you want to listen to the second half of this conversation, become a patron of the Horizontal Arts on Patreon, patreon.com/horizontal with Lila. And if you can't wait for the next episode 124 and 124 only, you can head over to Devin's This Podcast is a Ritual feed and listen to the full conversation there. This mashup was mixed and mastered by Irvin Gadori of igrecording.com. My cover art was illustrated by Shauna Shea, whom you can hire on 99 Designs. The remix of my original intro music was created by Kid Mental, whose motto is theme songs for everyone. You can both support a Black creator and get a theme song of your very own on Fiverr or on Patreon. Until next time, my horizontal ritualists, my ritual horizontalists, may you have someone to love, something to do, and something to look forward to. I'm looking forward to completing my camera kit, which is capable of 4K video and professional studio lighting, and finally beginning to shoot my masterclass style course on Connection. For information on that and other future horizontal endeavors, follow Horizontal with Lila on Instagram and sign up for my email missives on horizontalwithlila.com. Thank you for getting ritualistically horizontal.
From the bed, turn a spark to a fire. Horizontal with Lila. Horizontal with Lila.
And I love playing games with people, so this is a spell after my own heart. One of my absolute favorite games is one of the simplest, and it's one that I play every time I teach a Connection Games workshop. And it's the one that I brought out when my friend asked me to lead games at her 30th birthday party. And
I'm so sorry to interrupt. My screen says not recording.
oh, fuck. I just looked at it recently and it was recording. Why did it stop? Oh no.